I'll go ahead and begin. My name is Jeff Bensel. I work in Academic and Membership Affairs at the NCAA. I'll be joined today by my colleagues Chris Johnson and Jen Samble. In terms of today's agenda, I'm going to begin with a discussion of non-coaching staff members with sport-specific responsibilities, and then I will pass it to Chris, who will cover a few Bylaw 13 topics, virtual recruiting, camps and clinics and tryouts, and then Jen will conclude our session with a discussion of wearable technology and day-off waivers. We will pause for questions on each of those topics at the end of that particular topic before moving to the next one. First, non-coaching staff members with sport-specific responsibilities. This is an area where we've received a lot of questions in recent years and also some requests from the membership to provide additional guidance on the sorts of things that are permissible for non-coaching staff members with sport-specific responsibilities to engage in, whether it's recruiting, at practice, or on game day. I'll start with just a definition of these individuals. These are people who are not countable coaches, not a coach who is exempt from the countable coach limits, for example, a GA or a strength and conditioning coach, and is someone who performs sport-specific duties. So we have two broad categories here for recruiting, practice, and game day. This examples of things that are permissible as well as not permissible. This slide attempts to distill what's been made available to the membership in the form of published interpretations and ed columns, trying to pull all of that together, and those have been distributed or published over the last 4 to 5 years. So from a standpoint of permissible activities, sending general and electronic correspondence to prospective student athletes, meeting with prospective student athletes on campus, reviewing film and sharing analysis with coaches, as well as observing practice and game day activities, and performing administrative duties during practice and game day. On the other hand, it is not permissible for those individuals to engage in off-campus recruiting, review film with student athletes, or provide technical or tactical instruction to student athletes. They also cannot assist with tactical decisions during practice or competition, or participate in on-field or on-court practice activities. And what I'm going to focus on next are the last two bullets in each column: administrative duties versus participating in on-court or on-field practice activities. So here we're focused on what sort of things amount to assisting with practice or game day, and what sorts of things amount to actually participating during practice or game day. Whereas the previous slide covered a lot of items that have been included within published interpretations and ed columns, this slide summarizes approximately 24 cases that we've actually seen over the last few years. So if you think about what amounts to a non-coaching staff member assisting with practice activities, those are things like preparing for practice or game day, arranging equipment on the field, setting up cones for a drill, charting plays, running a clock for practice scrimmage, sitting on the bench or sideline, or wearing a headset, provided that individual is not engaging in making or assisting with tactical decisions. On the other hand, whereas those activities are more, I guess you could say, on the periphery of what's happening at practice at game day, participating involves something different. Now we've moved into assisting student athletes with stretching and warm-up, assisting with drills, rebounding, or demonstrating how to complete a drill, as well as signaling plays, officiating on the field during a practice scrimmage, and holding a whiteboard with assignments. Those sorts of things have now crossed the line from assisting with practice and game day to actually being an active participant during practice or game day. I would note here, as you can see, the highlighted portions, those two things are permissible for student managers to perform, as long as no technical instruction is provided. One other distinction between student managers versus non-coaching staff members is that student managers can be present during voluntary activities, whereas non-coaching staff members cannot. Before we pause for a few questions, I do want to point out that we as staff have developed an educational resource for Division I football non-coaching staff members. This educational resource will be provided to all participants for this session in the days to come. And ultimately, it is something that we hope will be helpful to you on campus, your athletic department staff, as well as your coaches in understanding the key parts of this legislation. This was an educational document that was actually requested by the Division I Football Oversight Committee and was just finalized within the last few days.
Jeff, the first question from the membership. Given a non-coaching staff member may not engage in off-campus recruiting, does that mean that the non-coaching staff member may not attend an off-campus meal during an official visit?
Thank you, DJ, and very good question. Yes, they can attend because that is part of the on-campus official visit. So it would be permissible for the non-coaching staff member to attend as long as it is within the 30-mile radius.
Jeff, second question. Is it possible to modify the football document to also address basketball?
That's a good question. At this point, that's something that I would have to discuss with liaisons to the Men's Basketball Oversight Committee. A lot of the principles would apply, to basketball as well as it relates to non-coaching staff members with sports-specific responsibilities, but that would require a separate educational document. But I will share that request and question with our MBOC liaisons.
Thank you, Jeff. Third and final question for this portion of the presentation. Given that a non-coaching staff member may send correspondence to a prospective student athlete, does that also mean that a non-coaching staff member would be able to send text messages to a prospective student athlete?
Yes, electronic communication is permissible. So text messages would be, a non-coaching staff member may send text messages.
All right, thank you, Jeff. This is Chris Johnson, and I'm going to move on to the next topic of virtual recruiting. Specifically today, we are going to be talking about electronic correspondence, publicity, and telephone and video conferencing calls. The first topic will be electronic correspondence. Now, we know electronic correspondence can be divided into two parts: the body of the correspondence, such as the email, and the attachments. Both of these do not have a content restriction. However, both must be private between sender and receiver. We also understand that attachments can be governed by 13.4.110 video audio materials. Now, these include GIFs, videos, animations that may be sent to a prospect through electronic correspondence. Now, the biggest things that come out of 13.4.110 is they may not be personalized to a prospective student athlete's name, image, likeness, and they must be created within the institution, meaning they cannot be outsourced to a separate third-party entity. Now, the institution may post these on their website or social media page, but that is not a requirement. When analyzing electronic correspondence, the question to ask is, who is participating, receiving, or able to view the communication between the prospective student athlete and the coach? We understand that direct messaging and Instagram, Facebook chat, and Twitter is permissible because it is private between sender and receiver. Also, email and text messages are also into that permissible column. Now, understanding that Facebook comments, Instagram comments are not permissible because everyone can see the communication between the PSA and the coach. Further, we understand that once the PSA has committed to the institution, that changes the privacy restrictions to allow the public communication between the coach and the prospective student athlete. The next topic I'd like to discuss is within virtual recruiting is publicity. First, we'll start out with prospective student athletes. We understand that an institution cannot comment on the likelihood of a prospective student athlete signing with that institution. That includes hints using area code, hometown, nicknames of a specific prospective student athlete to make people aware of a potential likelihood of commitment from a prospect. Now, in general, we've seen generic comments referencing that have zero reference to any specific prospective student athlete, like a recruiting hashtag, such as hashtag squad up. Confirmation of recruitment has received very many questions recently. Specifically, if a coach may confirm that they are recruiting a prospective student athlete if they are prompted by a media member. So in this instance, Jeff, a media member, asked Chris, a head coach, if they are recruiting Jen, a prospective student athlete. Chris, the head coach, may say, yes, I am recruiting Jen. However, that coach cannot comment on the likelihood of Jen signing with that institution or the potential contributions that Jen may have for the team. With the increase of social media usage and the different platforms, the availability of current student athletes to interact with prospective student athletes has increased dramatically over the years. Now, we know that this cannot be done at the direction of the coaching staff, and current student athletes cannot allude to future recruiting activities such as upcoming visits or potential contacts, off-campus contacts with a member of the coaching staff. Moving on to publicizing recruiting activity. In general, coaching staff or institutions should not provide information that would make the media or public aware of future recruiting activities specific to PSAs. So the question to ask is, if a coach tweets out information, does this allow a member of the media or public to be present for a recruiting or contact or evaluation? Now, actions of approval of recent receives exceptions on social media. Actions of approval include sharing, liking, favoriting of a post. We understand that a PSA's post, a PSA's coach, a prospective student athlete's facility, a prospective student athlete's team, those all may, an institution's coaching staff may take an action of approval on those posts. However, if the post involves is generated from a recruiting or scouting service, or the post has a hyperlink or link to the profile of a recruiting or scouting service, it would not be permissible for an institutional staff member to take an action of approval on that post. Now, moving on to podcasts and broadcasts. Podcasts, we've received very many questions related to an institution's coach involvement in podcasts and broadcasts. Specifically, the general rule is a PSA's coach or PSA may not be on the same podcast as an institutional coach. However, in 2006-44, the proposal 2006-44 allows an institutional coach to participate on a podcast run by a recruiting or scouting service, provided the institution's coach does not endorse the service, does not publicize any PSAs, or provide any evaluations for any PSAs. The intent of Proposal 2006-44 was to limit the confusion that now exists between the interlocked entities of a media organization and a recruiting or scouting service. The final topic I'd like to discuss is telephone and video calls. There's 4 parts that you need to ask if this is a permissible telephone or video call. 1, is the PSA of contactable age? Specifically, each sport has their sport-specific restriction about when they can contact, a coach can contact a prospective student athlete. Further, each sport also has a point where the prospect may initiate the call to the coach. Second question to ask, is it accountable coach making a phone call? Third, is the PSA or prospective student athlete engaged in competition? Fourth, what is the method or vehicle used to communicate with the prospective student athlete? Is it private between sender and receiver? An example of a permissible form would be a FaceTime between a prospective student athlete's family and the coach. An example of something that wouldn't be permissible would be a Facebook Live Q&A with a singular prospect.
Chris, thank you. The first question that we received was, may a coach send a prospect a generic GIF, not gift, GIF that is available on their smartphone or tablet?
Thanks, DJ. That's a great question that we receive quite often. And since that GIF is not generated within the institution, then that would not be permissible for a coach to send a generic GIF to the prospective student athlete. And that comes directly from staff interpretation.
Chris, do the podcast and broadcast limitations apply to an IAWP in addition to the prospect's coach? So, for example, would it be permissible to be on a podcast with a prospect's trainer during a podcast or broadcast?
DJ, that is a great question. And when we take a look at 131022, the radio TV show, which comes from the podcast and broadcast, while it does say that it is specific to a high school coach or two-year college coach, in general, there would be concerns related to, well, for one, it does not limit this to be you could have a trainer or a high school coach in accordance with 1310.2. However, I would have some concerns as it relates to endorsement in the Bylaw 11 space related to that. So the actual content of the podcast, I think, would come into play here, and I'd be interested if someone would love to submit that in RSRO to take a further historical look at that interpretation.
All right, Chris, final question at this point in time related to social media. Would a generic post containing a hashtag referencing a prospect state be permissible if the institution is recruiting a number of prospects from that state?
Thanks, DJ. Yes, this is a great question that comes directly from the staff interpretation on April 4th, 2018. Specifically, a student athlete's location is a direct or indirect reference to the likelihood of commitment, and that's bullet 3 in the likelihood of commitment in the staff interpretation. So to answer your question, regardless of how many prospective student athletes they are recruiting within that state, referencing a prospective student athlete's location related to comments referencing the likelihood of commitment would not be permissible. And that will conclude our conversations related to virtual recruiting, and we were going to move on now to camps and clinics versus tryouts. Specifically, I want to dive into the purpose of camps and clinics. Instructions specific to a sport that may include practice or competition. A camp and clinic is designed to improve skills and knowledge in the sport and offers a diversified experience without specific emphasis on instruction, practice, or competition within any sport. Now, we understand that camps and clinics have restrictions related to participants that require it to be open to any and all entrants. You can limit it by age, grade level, gender, number. We also know that each sport has their own limitations governing institutional and non-institutional camps. Now, moving over to the tryouts, tryouts are designed to reveal, demonstrate, and display the athletics abilities of prospective student athletes. Specifically, we see these in 7-on-7s, pickup basketball, strength and agility tests such as the 40-yard dash, the bench press, the shuttle run, and these are designed to showcase the prospective student athlete's athletic skills. In short, camps are designed to grow the sport through instruction. Tryouts are designed for a recruiting purpose for coaching staff members to evaluate a prospective student athlete and potentially subsequently solicit the enrollment of a prospective student athlete. Now, we know that institutions shall not have conducted or conduct any physical activity or tryout designed to demonstrate only the athletic skills of a prospective student athlete. When breaking this down between a camp and clinic, it comes down to instruction. What instruction is being provided to the prospective student athlete that would differentiate it from being a camp and clinic and a tryout?
Chris, it looks like we've received the following question. May a current student athlete be paid to serve only as a demonstrator at a virtual camp?
DJ, that's a great question. And at this time, a student athlete may not serve only as a demonstrator for a virtual camp. They have to have other camp responsibilities. Now, if this specific institution has other mitigating factors related to the virtual camp, go ahead, throw it in RSRO, tag me in it. I'd love to take a further look at it. All right, and that is it as of now. I'm going to turn it over to Jen Samble.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to talk a little bit right now about wearable technology. When we talk about wearable technology, we're referring to those devices that can monitor heart rate, pulse rate, other biometric data. Now, most frequently, you might see these in a wristband or a watch or machines, but there are other mediums that they can be put into. For example, biometric data can be recorded from devices placed and embedded in clothing and other items. So it's an evolving area right now. Now, the first thing you need to know is whether or not it's going to be CARA to use this particular biometric data. Because if you're in season and you're in your 20 hours in season or 8 hours out of season, there's no issue. Student athletes can be using these devices to monitor all types of things for training purposes, for just health purposes, all of those things. Quite often, though, when this material is used outside of a season, institutions have asked us if it can be considered voluntarily athletically related activities, so 1702.19. In order for the use of these devices to be included in voluntary athletically related activities, it has to meet all the potential areas of the bylaw. So the data can't be required to be reported back to the coach or other athletic department staff members by a student athlete, or be reported back and recorded to the coach through the use of the device. So kept in such a way at which the coach can look at this potential material at any point while the student athlete's participating in voluntary activities. It also has to be initiated by the student athlete, and there can't be any penalties for non-participation. Most of the questions in this area involve, again, CARA, VERA, if coaches can monitor, but we have had a few outside of that too. So these are the three areas that we see the most. If data is collected by a wearable fitness device that is related to voluntary activities, if it's viewed by an accountable coach or a non-coachable staff member with sport-specific responsibilities, does it trigger CARA? What if the above information is viewed by an athletic trainer? And finally, we get questions about a student being able to report using wearable technology on publicly available mediums such as Facebook. So what I'm going to do right now is take you through a few case examples of questions that we've been asked, and again, usually falling into one of these categories. So in case study number 1, the question is it permissible for an institution's head women's soccer coach to monitor her student athlete summer conditioning activities using the technology and resources we have, as long as these activities are truly voluntary and the request for feedback on the activities that the student athletes request? So for example, during the summer, the school has bought into a package where they have these biometric data materials, whether it's a watch, whether it's a wristband, some other device, and the student athlete has it with them in the summer. Would it be possible for the soccer coach to monitor her student athletes during the summer with these devices? The answer to this is no. So legislation doesn't not permit coaches to engage in countable athletic related activities outside the playing season. The use of this biometric data and this wearable technology in a way in which the soccer coach can monitor it triggers CARA. Another example, and I'm going to give you a fact scenario here because often when we get a question, there's more background to it than just a 1 or 2 sentence question that we're being asked. We often have to go back and say, well, give us a little bit more of an idea of what's going on and how this is being used, and so that we get a little bit more context. So in this case, the fact scenario is that the institution's softball coach would like the athletic trainer to assist her in suggesting the intensity of softball player workouts. What number of sprints should they be running? What should the distance runs be for pitchers? How many swings per workout works? And this will be based upon the data the athletic trainer is gathering from the wearable technology. So the coach and the athletic trainer working in conjunction here. The question off of this is, if softball student athletes were to utilize wearable technology during the summer, could the trainer provide guidance on how strenuous the workout should be? The answer would be no. So again, the data must be private between the student athletes and the athletic training staff. While it is permissible for the student athletes to wear heart rate monitors or other health monitoring devices and have that data collected by a member of the medical staff for medical purposes, the results may only be shared with the coach if the coach could permissibly conduct the workout. or unless there's a specific health and safety issue that is identified during the workout. So that the athletic trainers, if they're monitoring student athlete information, it should be because there's a medical purpose for it. If it is something that rises to a heightened medical concern, at that point they can share that with the coach to make sure, because it's a safety concern, to know that they're having an issue. But it shouldn't be something where that type of data is being reported regularly to the coach outside of a medical issue. And then the other part of this, which was an interesting twist, is a member of the medical staff may not make any tactical or technical recommendations to be implemented by student athletes based upon the data. So in this case, if the heart rates were staying down on a certain activity, the athletic trainer shouldn't then be recommending, okay, you need to up the intensity because heart rates are staying down, so we want them to do this. So the athletic trainers there for safety purposes. In this case, they're not there to recommend increasing intensity to the coach to then be used for decisions that they make in that training regimen. That third type of case, can a student athlete report wearable technology data information on Facebook? And we would say yes, legislation doesn't preclude a student athlete from posting a picture of a workout in a public forum such as Facebook. Pretty common on Facebook and some of these other mediums where somebody goes for a great run, they got a great time, or they just did a great trail, or they want to talk about a great workout they just had. Nobody's precluding a student athlete from posting that to their public followers on Facebook, so that's out there for the general public. But again, the institution should keep in mind that this posting can't be at the request of the coaching staff, and it shouldn't be in a situation where it's actually being the recording of the activities of the coaching staff. So being encouraged that this gets posted so they can see it. Further, a coaching staff can't recognize the student athlete for participating in these activities or cause any student athlete who chooses not to participate in these activities to face repercussions for not participating. So in other words, if a student athlete is posting all this and then the coach is commenting and liking and saying, this is great, keep it up, that's the encouraging of that. It's also encouraging other student athletes to do those workouts too. So that's why we say, go ahead, post it, you know, brag about your great exploits. I mean, a lot of people are working real hard in the summer, and that's something that athletes and non-athletes commonly do nowadays. So it's okay to do that, but not at the request of the coach and not in such a way that it's putting other people in a situation where they feel like they have to be doing those workouts and posting them too. Other considerations in this, again, expanding area of wearable tech. And we've gotten some questions now, but we know that those questions will even be different when we receive them in a year, because this avenue of collection of data is really growing. So we know that it's an evolving area. So what should you potentially be taking a look at as compliance personnel? What should you know? What should you be keeping an eye out for? Well, first of all, are you monitoring teams' use of wearable technology? Do you know who's using wearable tech and when they're using it? Second, is the institution allowing third parties, per se, examples, apparel contracts, access and use of student athlete data? And if so, does the institution have an approval process for use of student athlete data by third parties? We've recently had questions from athletic administrators, athletic directors, legal counsels, because in some of the new contracts, some of the apparel companies are having clothing materials that have biometric sensors inside the clothing, and it's in the contract. Well, the question we've had questions that asked us, what is this? What are our potential risks? If you're monitoring student athlete data and then another company is using them, one, who owns the data? Do you own it? Do the student athletes own it? Two, what's being done with that data? There's a lot of different things out there. Several schools have even instituted processes where if a student athlete's data is being used by an outside company, they run it through a faculty or an institution review board first. So these are just small examples of things that are happening out there, but it might be something you might want to keep an eye on as the technology continues to advance and people attempt to use it potentially for monetary value.
Jen, we received a question inquiring if a strength and conditioning coach may monitor wearable technology applications.
Good question. Thank you very much for that. So in the case of a strength and conditioning coach monitoring, in those situations when a strength and conditioning coach is permitted to do a workout. So you have a workout with a strength and conditioning coach. Can they monitor it at that point? Yes, a strength and conditioning coach can monitor the biometric data when they are permitted to do an actual workout. So strength and conditioning coaches, unless there's a health concern and you're working in conjunction with the athletic trainer and there's a worry about a heart rate getting too high or something like that, strength and conditioning coaches should only be monitoring a wearable tech biometric data if they are conducting the workout with that student athlete. So again, if it's a period when a strength and conditioning coach can do a workout, then it can be monitored. When we talk about voluntary activities, it has to be initiated by the student athlete. So you should follow the same rules, that if it's a time period and it's an activity at which they're permitted to work with the student athlete, then they would be permitted to monitor the biometric data. But if it doesn't fall right under those parameters, then I think that's something that you should basically, we'd be more restrictive. Now, I will say, just as been mentioned by my colleagues earlier, obviously we're in a different period right now with COVID. So if you feel there's a valid medical reason or there is something beyond just the voluntary activities reasons that your specific strength and conditioning coach should be able to monitor things to see if there's any potential flexibility given our current period, please submit a waiver or an interp depending on where you're at, and we'll certainly be happy to take a look at it because, again, this is an evolving area. As a reminder, again, a coach can only monitor if it's an activity at which the coach can be at. So when we talk about medical staff, we talk about potential strength and conditioning situations. We're talking about either a safety concern or an activity at which the strength and conditioning coach would be able to be there with the student athlete. We're talking about the same thing when we deal with a coach, only if the coach is permitted to engage in that particular activity with that student athlete. Okay, I'm going to move on to one more area, and then if we have additional time left, we'll take additional questions. And this is in the area of day off waivers. So we've received a number of these. We've got the legislation in there now, the 17176 legislation that talks about having that day off embedded for student athletes and student athlete time management. Now that it's been in place for a good period of time and a couple cycles here, just thought that it was important to review that so that everybody's very clear on what's permissible, what isn't. And again, in those situations when you feel you have to file a waiver, what types of documentation should you include in that waiver? So first of all, 17176 is autonomy legislation. So it only applies to institutions and autonomy conferences and those that have chosen to opt into the specific legislation within the time management area. One day off per calendar week is required for the student athletes, and there is an exclusion for conference and postseason championships, including bowl games, NIT, and NCAA championships. Health and safety activities and academic meetings can be held on the day off. And a travel day may not be used unless the team is returning from an away-from-home competition, the team returns to campus before 5 a.m., and no required athletically related activities occur for a continuous 24 hours after the team is released following the return to campus. There's a few other exceptions out there that allow you to have some relief from the one day off every week legislation. One is the 3 contests in a 7-day period. If your team participates in 3 dates of competition in a 7-day period, institution is not subject to the 1 day off per week requirement, provided the student athletes do not engage in any countable athletically related activities for 2 days, either the preceding or the following week to the week that you have those 3 contests. We have received some waivers in the past to do it 2 weeks earlier or 2 weeks later. We'll talk a little bit about what you need to include in a waiver if that's a decision you decide to go in. But this legislation has been in place for a few cycles now, so these are things that you should be aware of or ready for when you make out your sports season plan. Another exception is travel to or from Hawaii or Alaska, and in that case, because of the length of travel involved in those you can use an athletically related day of travel day as a day off as long as no other required athletically related activities occur during that day. The third exception is when an institution's competition is canceled prior to the start of competition or canceled prior to the competition being considered a completed event. An institution can use that day as its required day off, provided the institution does not engage in any further required athletically related activities during that day. Now let's talk a little bit about waivers. So there is a previously approved waiver when you're on those long extended trips, when you're on a summer training trip, when you're on a vacation period trip. And that is under 17176, you can use your required day off campus. So originally when this legislation first came in, we had a lot of people who were going to be off campus more than 7 days. Got a lot of waivers that dealt with, well, we're out for 10 days. We clearly have to be able to take our day off away from campus. And in that case, because we saw a number of them, we were able to get CLR to agree to do a previously approved waiver. So again, just keep your documentation on that, but just give them a day off free from care or rare for the day, and you can use it off campus. Now, when I talked about waivers and what you should include in this, again, this legislation's been in for at least a couple cycles now. So waivers have a high bar for approval at this point. If an institution feels it has a case which, due to a number of different issues, there still is a need for a waiver, and they have very good information why, we still do accept the waivers, and we grant them in cases in which the documentation below is present. One is there a health or safety concern. Something's happened. As you can see, events often are outside of all of our control. So if there's a health or safety concern and that prevents you from being able to take that day off or that away from required athletically related activities, file the waiver, we'll deal with it. If there's a serious health or safety concern, that should actually be something you're calling us on the emergency phone line, and we'll let you know if we can do it as a phone waiver, if something is that serious and there's that big of a concern. Forces that were beyond an institution's control and could not have been anticipated. Extreme weather circumstances. And sometimes we understand now that extreme weather circumstances have an impact on multiple days. And when that happens and it causes an issue, a disruption, that would be a time to have a waiver. And you should put in a health and safety concern and forces that were beyond the control. So if you have both of those, put them in. But you should have at least one of those in order to file that waiver. The second part of it, the and, is please provide a detailed plan of how the student athletes will be made whole for time off that is not provided during the period requested in the waiver. So an important thing to remember on this is time management plans were put in to make sure that student athletes had time preserved outside of the required activities. If you can't give a day off because of a health or safety concern or because forces beyond your control caused you to not have that day off, staff would also like to see a detailed plan of how you're going to make up for that. So here's what happened. It was beyond our control. It was a health and safety concern. We had to do it this way. We understand that. File the waiver, and then tell us how you're going to make it up to the student athletes so, again, they'll be made whole at some point in the future.
Jen, we received the question, may our institution request a required day off waiver while we are still in the same declared week, but we were unable to give the student athletes the day off that we had initially planned during the week?
Good question. Thank you. We always hope that you can be proactive if something serious has come up. So again, I said health or safety concern or something beyond your control. We would not say that you can't file a waiver during that week. However, if you still have part of the week left, you might want to do the best you can to be able to make the student athletes whole at that point, and then not have to then in the future try to figure out what to do. So the short answer is yes, especially if it's a health or safety concern. And again, that might be right for a phone waiver potentially if you're in the week. But every opportunity should be given to remedy it when you can. Because the first question that would be asked once we get it is it ripe? So can you do it before then? And until it's ripe, we may not rule on it, at which point, again, do the best you can to mitigate it. This is a cooperation between the membership and our staff, so do the best you can to mitigate. still can't mitigate, or you know it's an issue. Let's say it's the 6th day of your week and you have a game today and you have a game tomorrow. Clearly, you're not going to be able to make that up because you have 2 games in both those days. But if you can mitigate it, if not, you know, you can always reach out to us. We're here to help. And we know that especially in these waivers, they're usually because something unusual has happened and you're just trying to make the best for the student athletes. On the backside, the reason why the legislation was put in to make sure that those student athletes are made whole and their time is preserved.
Chris, it looks like we have some follow-up questions related to camps and clinics. The first part of a 2-part question, can our team camp consist only of games? And the second portion of that, if instruction needs to be provided, how do I know how much instruction our coaches need to provide at a team camp?
Thanks, DJ. These are actually great questions. I'll start with the first one. The team camp consisting of games only and competition only, that would not be permissible, as instruction would need to be provided to the prospective student athletes. A member of the coaching staff can't utilize the name of a camp to hide a tryout. So in the case where they're only competing against each other, prospective student athletes are only competing against each other and instruction is not being provided, that would not be permissible. And in parts of that second question is how much instruction needs to be provided. That's a difficult one. In my opinion, and the staff has not indicated a certain level of instruction that needs to be provided. However, the institution needs to be able to demonstrate that instruction was provided to the prospective student athlete. And a good way of looking at this is a prospective student athlete walking away from that camp, do they feel they improved their athletic skills through the instruction of the coach? If they are not feeling that way, I would assume that would not be the instruction portion of a camp or clinic.
All right, it looks like we had a follow-up question related to Bylaw 17. With many schools changing travel plans due to budget concerns, is there any talk of potential flexibility or relief related to 5 a.m. and institutions or student athletes not departing from campus prior to 5 a.m. for road trips?
Hey, DJ, I'm happy to take that one as well. And, you know, that's a great question. And all of the impacts of COVID are being taken on as a case-by-case basis. So if an institution is faced with this problem, we would like them to submit an RSRO as a formal request and then take a look at it as a team.
This is a perfect example, I think, that question of what happens when things come up on an emergency basis. So with COVID, we know that things might come up. We know that there might be huge budget impacts. Just make sure that when you file those things, as Chris said, let us take a look at it as a team. Remember to file how you would make people whole and to be real clear in what kind of impact it would have on you financially, or the fact that simply maybe there's less flights. We know that there's less flights going out right now. We know that there's going to be new travel restrictions, and these restrictions could actually occur during the season. So as this could potentially be a health and safety concern or something that's well beyond your control, again, reach out to us. This is part of us working through these issues together as we get through this period. Okay, well, great conversation today. Great questions. We tried to capture a lot of them. Again, thank you for participating in today's webinar. If you do have follow-up questions, and we know you will, regarding the information presented, please reach out to us. Reach out to AMA staff, reach out to your contacts, put things through RSRO, or reach out to Chris, Jeff, and myself. Again, thank you, and have a nice rest of your day.